In Paris in the 50s and 60s, movie lovers sat in cafes like these and rethought cinema. They felt at the center of the movie world, but they weren't. Filmmaking went global in the 60s. For the first time, its energy was exhilarating. To tell its story, we have to travel around the world. Let's start here, in Eastern Europe, behind the Berlin Wall. Movie makers here had far more about which to be defiant than their Parisian colleagues. In Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and the Soviet Union, directors bravely made modern personal films that drove the medium forward and stood up to their governments. As a result, some of the movie makers were stopped in their tracks or imprisoned, and many of the films were banned. The story starts in Poland. Take this scene in Andrzej Wajda's Ashes and Diamonds. A young man and a woman flirt.
Przy na dnie popiołu zostanie gwiaździsty diament wiekuistego zwycięstwa za ramię.
It's the first day of peace after World War II. Poland has been torn apart. The man, Maciek, has been in the Warsaw Uprising against the Nazis. But now the communists are coming, and he hates them too. He wears dark glasses, not like James Dean because they're cool, but because he spent ages underground in the sewers of Warsaw. He's a rebel with a cause.
Muszę ci coś powiedzieć.
Nic smutnego?
Nie.
Like the great British film, The Third Man, partially set in sewers, Ashes and Diamonds is Wellesian, expressionist, full of symbols of the world turned upside down. Andrzej Wajda's films are distinctive because, in a very Polish way, he disguises meaning by encoding it in symbols.
Chciałem zmienić pewne rzeczy. Inaczej urządzić życie.
Wajda was a shrinking violet compared to this Polish director, Roman Polanski, who became one of the most famous filmmakers in the world. He cuts fast to the jazzy double bass strumming. He played a small part in his short film, Two Men in a Wardrobe, fresh-faced, cocky, beating up on a decent guy. Polanski was Jewish. During the war, he saw Poles defecate on German soldiers. His mother was murdered in Auschwitz-Birkenau. As a child, he loved not colour films or escapist musicals, but this British film, Laurence Olivier's Hamlet. He loved the way the camera tracked through the mysterious spaces of the castle and its claustrophobia. Castles would recur in his own work. Polanski's first feature film, Knife in the Water, is one of the most claustrophobic ever made. We're on a small boat. On the right is a husband who owns the boat. Swimming in the distance is his wife, very deep focus photography. On the left is a student they've invited onto their boat. The wife fancies the student, a love triangle. The husband's arm literally forms a triangle. The husband resents the student. The student knows this and plays power games. The humiliation of getting too close. Unlike most Polish films of the time, Knife in the Water didn't deal with war, a sign that society and history would be less interesting for Polanski than, in this case, the human triangle. Knife in the Water was called art for art's sake, the very definition of modernism, and was condemned by the authorities because it wasn't social enough. And so Polanski left social realist Poland and took his modernism with him. In 1967, Polanski released this gorgeous spoof horror movie, one of his best films. As you can see, it's set in a winter wonderland, shot in a studio, again cut off from society. A beautiful widescreen vision of Jewish Middle Europe, like a Marc Chagall painting. Polanski here plays a dopey apprentice. Opposite him, his producer cast a beautiful young actress, Sharon Tate. She and Polanski took LSD together, fell in love and conceived a child. They set up home in Hollywood. Polanski's dream would soon end. His wife, unborn child, and friends were murdered by the Manson family. If Polanski had taken his train south from Poland to Czechoslovakia in the late 50s and 60s, he'd have come across a movie world not a million miles away from his own. Czechoslovakian cinema was, in these days, specializing in animation and puppetry. Jiří Trnka was its figurehead. Trnka's famous 1965 film, The Hand, is one of the most hauntingly symbolic movies in the story of film. A fun-loving little man is disturbed in his home by a hand. Trnka uses live action for the hand, but stop motion for the man. The hand sends him a TV set, a reminder of Douglas Sirk's film, All That Heaven Allows. The TV shows him images of power. Trnka uses paper cutouts. The hand indoctrinates the man, makes him sculpt a giant effigy. But then he tries to resist the indoctrination, but his attempts prove fatal. A sound like a bomb, and suddenly we're outside the puppet theatre.
Today it's...
Where Trnka's film was about a haunted life, his fellow Czech, Miloš Forman, saw life as comic, almost absurd.
Theoretically also because...
Forman's start in life was similar to Polanski's. He was Jewish, both his parents were killed by the Nazis, and he was a film school graduate. Firemen were supposed to be portrayed as heroic public servants in the communist world. But in Forman's very funny film, The Fireman's Ball, they're incompetent and immature, clueless like Laurel and Hardy. They're staging a beauty contest, but they couldn't organize a piss-up in a brewery.
Někdo nám zebral z tombol několik cen. Nemůžeme pokračovat. My teďko zasneme. Bude tma. V této nastalé tmě ten, kdo to zcizil, to tam odnese. No ne, ještě nezačínej, ještě ne. Ještě jsem nedomluvil. Rozsvít. No nezačínejte, rozsvíťte. Co to? Tady nějaký nedorozumění.
Forman has his movie filmed without gloss, almost like a documentary, a Cassavetes film. The most innovative director in Czechoslovakia at the time was Vera Kytilova. This is the first scene in her film Daisies. Two women, marry one and marry two, squeak like dolls.
Ano. Jsem takhle jako pana, ne? Já jsem pana. Aha. Chápeš to?
It's as if they're puppets being worked by the hand from Trnka's film.
Nikdo ne.
There are astonishing sequences like this. Trippy, like the Lumiere brothers on acid. And then, in a sequence like this, we're in the world of pop art, of Andy Warhol. The authorities hated Daisies, of course, and, After the Soviet Union clamped down on Czechoslovakia in 1968, Kitalova, because of her modernism, was banned from working for 6 years. In Czechoslovakia's neighbouring country, Hungary, movie making entered its innovative golden age in the 60s. Take this early scene in Miklos Janšo's The Red and the White. We're in Russia in 1918. Revolutionaries, Reds, clash with counter-revolutionaries, Whites. A red soldier hides behind a bush as white guards on horseback capture his friend. Janšo shows this in a single roving 3-minute shot, 10 camera moves, without a single cut. Whereas 60s Czech cinema was interested in lightness and mockery, Janšo used the highly planned tracking shots favoured by Mitsuguchi in Japan or Hitchcock in America to create tension, a sense of breath being held. Like Mitsuguchi, he doesn't get close to his characters' faces. The detached control of Janšo's camera is like the detached control of the white infantryman. Form echoing content, a very modern idea. At the end of the film, this happens. Finally, a near close-up. A soldier looks to camera. Humanity at last crashes into Janšo's icy universe of control and despair. No one in the story of film used long takes better to evoke suffering. The influence of Janšo on the 90s Hungarian director Béla Tar was profound. And then we get to the Soviet Union itself in the 60s. Its socialist dreams had been calcified or turned to kitsch. But even here, filmmakers managed to be highly personal and push the boundaries of the medium. This is the greatest Soviet director of these times, Andrei Tarkovsky. Loving the moment of lining up a shot, filmed with the sort of tracking camera that he himself often used. He taught this man, Alexander Sokurov, the greatest Russian director of modern times. The essence of Tarkovsky's innovation is that in a materialist society like the Soviet Union, he made films about non-material things, the elevation of the human soul, transcendence. Look at the very opening of his early film, Andrei Rublev, the year 1400. We're in a bell tower. A peasant ties himself to something. Crisp, black and white photography. A balloon made of skins. It takes off and we look down. The wide-angle lens makes the perspective plunge, ballooning space. Tarkovsky's cinema has taken off. The film was banned for 6 years because it was religious. This is the camera that Andrei Rublev was shot with. Tarkovsky's movies would be about the human spirit soaring from now on. In the mirror, as a man dies, a bird flies from his hand, like the Christian idea of the Holy Ghost. The astonishing endings of his films show that they are what he called directors of the absolute. Have you ever seen anything like this ending of Tarkovsky's film Stalker? For more than 2 hours, we've followed 3 men to a numinous place, the zone. Then we meet this girl, the daughter of one of the men. There's steam from hot water in a glass. The camera creeps backwards. The colours are muted, sepia. Dandelion seeds float in the air. We hear a train. And then suddenly this. A kind of miracle. An off-screen dog yelps, as if it's been scared by the ghostly event. Is the girl moving the glass with her mind? If so, the train's vibrations shake the glass too, so the physical and the metaphysical combine, an exaltation. And then there's the ending of Tarkovsky's film Nostalgia. We've followed this man and his dog throughout the film and seen his house, which is in the background. The camera pulls out and we see reflections in the pool in the foreground. Only gradually do we see what is reflected. A ruined cathedral. The whole world of the story seems to be contained in it. And then it snows. Rapture. Not so much modern as ancient, but startlingly new in cinema. Tarkovsky wrote that imagery contains an awareness of the infinite, the spiritual within matter. Carl Theodor Dreyer and Robert Bresson would have agreed, but neither produced imagery this remarkable. Another Soviet director, even more against his times, suffered more than any other filmmaker in the story of film so far. Sergei Parajanov loved the music, painting and folklore of the times before the Soviet Union. His sixth film, Shadows of Our Forgotten Ancestors, showed that Parajanov also adored the poetic cinema of 20s master Alexander Dovzhenko. The film begins with this breathtaking point-of-view shot of a falling tree. Later, there's this shot from under a daisy looking up. Parajanov's camera is seldom at eye level. No filmmaker since Orson Welles used foreground more. The story of the film is like Romeo and Juliet. Here, Parajanov films the lovers from underwater. Then we go to this amazing dream sequence. The girl seems to have died. We're in this silver forest. The lovers are searching for each other. They float as if they're mounted on the camera. Their faces painted the color of the trees, like they're spirits of the forest. Not since Fellini or even Jean Cocteau has such a magical and personal visual world been created in cinema. After I made this film, tragedy struck, said Parajanov. Shadows of Our Forgotten Ancestors was everything the Soviet realists hated. Personal, sexual, in their word, decadent. Parajanov, who's directing on set here like he's conducting an orchestra, was imprisoned on charges of incitement to suicide and homosexuality. Filmmakers around the world protested, and he was released 4 years later. It's already clear that the new waves, modern cinema in the 60s, took many forms: personal, self-aware, comic, spiritual. Here in Japan in the 60s, modernism was in angry mode, furious in fact. Since the defeat of World War II, Japanese movies had been mostly sociological, about trauma and humiliation. But then came this man, Nagisa Oshima. This is Oshima's film Boy, a composition using the full wide screen. On the extreme left stands a 10-year-old boy. On the right in blue is his stepmother. She seems worried that he'll get hurt crossing the road. But she's not worried, because they're about to fake an accident. The boy pretends to get run over. His stepmom blackmails the driver. Oshima's showing us the cynicism of modern Japan, its greed. Despite its bleak view of life, Boy was a hit, and the profits funded another, even more bitter Oshima film, this one in the realm of the senses. The film, based on a true story, starts gently, almost like a Mitsuguchi movie. It's about a geisha and is set in the 1930s. But within minutes, this happens. An old man, humiliated by kids, poked at intimately with the Japanese flag. A provocation against Japanese propriety, modesty, what's left of its nationalism and respect for elders. The geisha becomes obsessed by a client and finally castrates and strangles him. Blood-red imagery and near silent make the strangulation haunting.
shimeru.
In real life, the woman served just 5 years for second-degree murder. This is her, Abe Sada, nodding respectfully in the Japanese way, conservatively dressed. Oshima saw her not so much as a feminist martyr, as someone whose unglamorous story blew apart the mystique of geishas and of Japan. But this man was even bolder in his portrayal of women in modern Japan. Shohei Imamura worked with the world's most serene filmmaker, Yasujiro Ozu, but came out of that apprenticeship like a bullet out of a gun. This documentary frames him as he often framed his films, in a window with out-of-focus edges. A woman cuts his hair. His films are often about women. In this opening scene from one of Imamura's early masterpieces, The Insect Woman, he films this insect as a no-nonsense metaphor for human beings, struggling over life's rough terrain. Then he cuts to a woman, Tomei, in Japan in the 1910s, struggling too. She's raped and has a daughter, works on the farm with her father. Even in this scene, suckles the father. Imamura the rebel would have loved the shock of this moment. Tomei leaves the child with her father and then goes to work in a factory. Imamura and the cameraman, Shinsaku Himeda, use this widescreen space exquisitely. Look at this scene. The foreground out-of-focus looms create a deep space in-focus window, an image as confident, as dynamic as this one in Orson Welles' Citizen Kane. Again, a key character framed in the far distance. Then Tomei becomes a housemaid for a Japanese woman who's had a child with an American GI. In this scene, the child's in the background out of focus. Tomei's in focus. We hear the woman and the American making love. Tomei's distracted by this. But look at the child. She spills boiling food over herself. Imamura stages the scene in just 2 shots. The second is even better than the first. The flame in the foreground, its heat shimmer, parts of the scalded child. Economic storytelling, brilliant use of widescreen. If Madame Ombro had taken her plane to India in the 60s rather than America, she would have found filmmakers as radical as Oshima and Imamura, but even more modern and determined to challenge film language. The greatest Indian director of the late 50s and 60s was this man, Ritvik Ghatak, passionate, drunken, wildly talented. He inspired a generation of filmmakers, including this one, Mani Kaul. This scene in Ghatak's Ajantrik shows the first thing we notice about his movies, their heightened emotions. A little boy playing with a car horn. Lovely framing, natural light. Cut to a man in close-up, moved to tears because the horn is all that's left of his beloved old car, his taxi, his income that he had for decades. We see the realization on the man's face that life goes on, and at least the child is getting pleasure from the fragment of his car. A classic Indian melodrama.
But I couldn't reconcile with the melodrama of his work. Only slowly I understood, like at the end of his life, I think I began to understand what he did. And people don't realize that, I think, is that he opened that idea of melodrama to the pain of history.
Kaul means that Ghatak's melodramas weren't just about personal emotions. They were about the emotions of history. For Ghatak, the great emotion in recent Indian history was the partition of the country, in which 500,000 people died and 15 million were forced to move. He called it India's original sin. This film was about that original sin. We start with this splendid shot of a majestic avenue of trees as old as history, filmed at dawn. Our lead character, Nita, walks from them to us. She's from a refugee Bengali family, forced by partition to live on the outskirts of Calcutta. She tries to hold her family together. Cut to this shot. This is her ineffectual brother who just sits around and sings. But in the background of this brilliant widescreen composition, a train passes. As misty as the tree, beautiful in its way, but slicing through the horizon like a knife. Ghatak's visionary film showed the family sliced by history. And Ghatak wasn't only daring with the story, he was wildly experimental in his use of sound. Here he acts in Yukti Tako Agapo and distorts the sound as if the film is a sci-fi movie.
লোকে এখনো তোমাকে শ্রদ্ধা করে, আশা করে।
He was very impressed by the statement on sound made by Einstein, Podolkin, and who was the third one, that the counterpuntal use of sound, the counterpoint, as much as he was, inculcating in us a new kind of cinema, he was also very forcefully condemning, the commercial work and the kind of work that is just very degenerate and decadent for him.
In the mid-60s, Manny Call himself became a modernist filmmaker. This is his great experimental film, Uski Roti. The man's about to throw a stone at a guava in a tree to make it fall so that he can give it to his woman. But look at the way Manny Call paces the action. He throws 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Not exactly the rapid fall of Isaac Newton's apple.
I always felt that Godard was making films that are like faster than the time experience in normal life. And I needed to go slower than that, I just needed to go slower. Suppose there's a static guava on a static table and the camera is static, then the only thing that is functioning there is time. The moment there is a movement, that idea of time is alienated. So this whole idea of long take or evoking time or disjointed editing, actually coincides with the idea of waiting. And in waiting, of course, a whole world is created mentally, like as you wait, like you create a whole world. What is known as self in our philosophy, in a way, not as self is understood in psychology, is something that the mind cannot perceive, In the Upanishads and all, to which Ritvik Ghatak also referred in a different way, there is the self is described as it is suggested as indescribable, unreachable, unknowable, unavailable to senses. So it was never experienced, but it's always there. So this affects very deeply the question of art, that you really cannot make that self as a subject, of filmmaking. It is in fact the one who's making the film,
And Call's Indian idea that the person making the film is the subject of the film is the very definition of modernism. And, like the turning of the earth, the modern new waves kept on coming. In Brazil in the 60s, film was at its most inventive yet. The most innovative movie in what became known as Cinema Novo was directed by the writer and theoretician Glauber Rocha when he was just 25. Here's the climax of the film. This cowboy has killed his greedy, exploitative boss. As a result, he's become an outlaw. Rocha filmed in the intense heat of the poor northeast of Brazil where he was born. This is the cowboy's wife. She turns in bewilderment and despair. The opposite of the happy dancing characters in the musical carnival films of Brazil's commercial movie industry. The cowboy and his woman follow a strange black Christian preacher who preaches revolution. They follow the preacher praising the promised land. Suddenly the preacher's followers are shot. The scene's edited like an Eisenstein movie. The killer is Antonio das Mortes, a symbol of vengeance. And at the end, a troubadour sings, "A world badly divided cannot produce good. The earth belongs to man, not God or devil." Rocha wrote that violence is normal when people are starving. He'd found a way of combining innovative film style with fiercely anti-colonialist ideas. Cinema Novo inspired filmmakers throughout the Third World. One of those places was the island of Cuba. It had a revolution in 1959, after which its films hummed with fervor and form. This is the film I Am Cuba, and was actually rejected by many Cuban filmmakers. A student revolutionary has been killed by the right-wing authorities. The camera seems to levitate. Wide-angle lens, handheld, beautiful exposure, slow motion. It's a prayer for the dead student. The camera climbs a building, a crane shot so beautiful that in the 90s, after years of I Am Cuba being forgotten in America, it was shown at the Telegraph Film Festival, impressed Martin Scorsese and Francis Coppola, and was re-released. But then the camera crosses the street. Still no cut. It moves to the end of this room. A flag's unfurled. And we glimpse two wires in the sky. The camera's attached to those wires, then floats out over the funeral, down the canyon of a Havana street. Where Brazilian films of the 60s often used pared-down minimalism to express their anger in politics, this Russian-Cuban film believes that the beauty of a shot like this, a camera on wings, the soul of a dead student, will make the idea of the revolution itself beautiful. And if we now move to the Middle East, we find that 60s modern cinema became richer still. In Iran, revolution wouldn't come until 1979, and then problematically. But in 1962, its first great film was made, and its director was a woman. Iran's the only country in the world where the founding filmic father is a mother. We're in a colony of people with leprosy. Director Farrokhzad, who was 27 when she made the film, shot in black and white. What still amazes is the film's sincerity, its attempt to move beyond simple description. The people in the film are thankful for their lives. And look at Farrokhzad's filming technique. The little girl's wheelbarrow ride is intercut with scenes from the lives of the people. Then the squeak of the wheel seems to compel the editing to speed up. This isn't Impressionism or Expressionism or Soviet 1 + 1 = 3. It's a shot as a unit of poetry, rhyming with another shot. The movement of the wheelbarrow rhymes with the apparent movement of the reflection on the water. Farrokh died in a car accident, aged just 32. This glimpse of her captures her flair, how 60s she was. As we'll see, her film was a huge influence on this great Iranian director of the 90s, Samira Makhmalbaf. Four years after The House is Black, another country started filming itself innovatively. Senegal and West Africa had been colonized by the French. When it became independent in 1960, its first president, the poet Léopold Senghor, funded culture heavily. Out of this moment came Black Africa's first innovative feature film, The Black Girl. It's about a young black woman who works for this white French family, looking after their kids. She gives the family an African mask as a present. She's impressed by luxuries like a sprinkler to water the garden. Somben filmed in rich parts of Dakar, Senegal's capital. Somben himself had been a bricklayer, studied film in Moscow, joined the Communist Party, so his film cares about work, its dignity. In France with the family, the girl's work becomes drudgery. She's treated as a slave. Finally, unable to cope, the girl commits suicide. The scene is starkly black and white, almost like 60s pop art. Shaken and guilty, the French husband returns the mask to the poor part of Dakar where the girl lived. The girl's younger brother follows the man. Somben films simply, like a John Ford Western. The boy is haunting. The mask, a gift in the spirit of hope, has become a death mask, a guilt mask, a weapon. Decolonialization asks the question, what sort of films do we, black Africans, want to make? Somben's answer is this: contemporary films about modern society in which Marxism and gender are linked and which are laced with symbols. As we'll see, Somben, the founding father of black African cinema, inspired the great African films of the 70s and since. And even in the English-speaking world in the 60s, revolution was in the air. In Britain, which last appeared in the story of film with the movies of David Lean and Lindsay Anderson, films were getting more aware of social class. Saturday Night and Sunday Morning wasn't set here in London, but here in the working-class Midlands of England. Shot in black and white, on real streets, no exterior lights. It's about this factory worker. He still lives in an ordinary 2-up, 2-down house with his mum and dad. Cramped front room. Dad's haircuts from the 30s. Son's got a touch of rock and roll about him. He gets a girl pregnant. She has to have an abortion. All this seemed new to audiences. But British director Ken Loach didn't feel that such films were really new.
They seemed to us to be an advance, but they were basically taking the established cinema industry and the established actors to the north, and saying these people are a fit subject for films and for drama, but imposing a kind of a West End pattern onto them.
Let's get our eyes closed.
We hadn't had Thatcher. You know, we hadn't had that calamity of '79, and you know, there's no such thing as society. We'd still had society.
This film cares about a bullied boy who finds solace in training a kestrel. Shows how Loach turned his sense of collective experience into an honest and direct film style.
We tried to echo the style of the Czech films, which was naturalistic light. A certain range of lenses which kept the camera away from the performers, the people in the film, so they weren't inhibited by an overbearing camera presence.
He's a nice bird. I shouldn't like gambling.
And editing, not editing before a person spoke, but editing when your eye would naturally go to that person, which generally follows when they speak. And I remember an old editor saying, oh no, you've always got to cut 2 or 3 frames before they speak. And I thought, this is ridiculous. No, if I'm in a room and you're speaking, I'll hear you and then I'll look.
Such techniques revealed a key theme in the story of film, that there's a connection between film style and politics.
Because it's knowing that you're speaking that makes me look.
The kitchen sink dramas and the Ken Loach films were naturalist in style. But then London and its Soho district became sexy, the music and fashion capital of Europe. British cinema became all about this youth buzz. And this tour of world cinema in the modernist 60s in America. Just as the radical filmmakers of Japan, Brazil, Cuba, Senegal, Iran and the UK in the 60s challenged the fact that movies were made by rich people or colonizers. Even in America, radical voices were being heard. President John Kennedy was assassinated in 1963. Malcolm X was gunned down in 1965. Protests against a war in Vietnam, where 1 million civilians died, grew. And in cinema, box office continued to tumble. People stayed at home to watch TV. The biggest movie hits of the time were Ben-Hur and The Sound of Music. But the fervent, the innovation, came from filmmakers who were again training their eyes on the real world. In 1959, a group of filmmakers made Primary, a new type of documentary.
Primary are very risky. But my judgment is I never could have been nominated if I hadn't run in Primary, so I'm taking the risk. But I would say you have to keep coming up sevens.
Filmmakers didn't stage scenes, as Robert Flaherty did in Nanook of the North. Theirs wasn't the poetics of Humphrey Jennings or the operatics of Leni Riefenstahl. They didn't do interviews or use hidden camera techniques. So what was left? What became known as fly on the wall. Here, Robert Drew follows John Kennedy where he goes, regardless of focus or pretty lighting. How modern, how free. It would take nearly 3 decades and the invention of small video cameras before documentary improved on this freedom. The imagery of Primary and shadows was so new, so direct, that it made Hollywood cinema look stale and conservative. One of Hollywood's greatest directors, Alfred Hitchcock, the master of colour and sheen, realised this. He wanted his next film, about an ordinary woman who's stabbed while having a shower, to be as convincing, as of the moment as possible, and so shot the film in black and white, TV style.
Officer, that was the first time I ever saw the customer high pressure the salesman.
He had actress Janet Leigh wear plain clothes from ordinary shops. He said that the film was an experiment. It was called Psycho. The woman's stolen money but decides to return it. Relieved, she takes a shower to feel clean again, to wash away the worries and the moral dirt. At this moment, what had been a spare, almost austere film splinters into shards. The cutting of Eisenstein, but also Abel Gance in La Rue. A horrific experience felt in expressionist flashes, 70 different camera angles for just 45 seconds of film. Still in America, from New York's art underworld in the early 60s, this artist emerged. Andy Warhol pushed the directness of modern filmmaking as far as it could go. Here, he just eats a hamburger, no feeling, no emotion, no expression, static shot, flat lighting, the blankness of the here and now. He was fascinated by things like this. and this. When Warhol took to cinema in 1963, his approach was as radical as Bresson. He stripped it of all its expressive elements. His early film Blowjob, for example, is nothing but the close-up of a man's face. As, we presume from the title, he's receiving oral sex. No dialogue, no sound of any sort, no camera moves or story. Bresson minus any attempt at spirituality. Blowjob, together with the work of Jean Cocteau and Kenneth Anger, led the way for what became known as new queer cinema of the 90s. In the 60s, cinematographer Haskell Wexler helped change the look of Hollywood studio movies by filming one of the great stars, Elizabeth Taylor, daringly realistically, in black and white, makeup smudged, harsh lighting. When he came to direct, he made a movie, Medium Cool, which pushed the relationship between documentary TV and American fiction cinema as far as it could go. It's about this TV cameraman. Here he watches a Martin Luther King speech and feels fired up.
Jesus, I love to shoot film.
I think he says that because he has a sensory feeling about images, but I also think that he says that because it protects him. It gives him an idea of putting things within a frame. It gives him an idea of being detached, being an observer, and then being an observer absolves him from being a participant. Those are some of the gut things. You may, as a camera person, been in a place where you say, I have to put the camera down. Those are critical times in a person's development as the relationship to what we call our art.
And in trying to analyse these ethical issues about filming, Wexler drew on the ideas of Jean-Luc Godard.
I saw every Godard film, and I also he stayed when I lived in Hollywood. He stayed at my house in Hollywood, and I don't think he said 4 words to me at all that time. In Medium Cool, most of the filming ideas stolen directly from Godard.
In this ending, in which the cameraman's killed, no edits more than 4 frames, inserted black frames, the camera tossed around. All along, the cameraman has been the voyeur, but now he's the centre of the voyeurism.
NBC TV is right on the roof of the Haymarket Cocktails restaurant.
Wexler turns the camera directly on the audience, as if we're being filmed, to make us think about how we're represented and about the politics of filming itself. The films made by Wexler and his generation made old Hollywood look outdated, and so the studios were bought or closed. Warner Brothers was bought by a company that owned car parks and funeral parlours. This studio, that used to be Columbia, the studio of Cary Grant and Rita Hayworth, was bought by Coca-Cola. Amongst all these endings, new things happened. No less than 1,500 film courses were now being taught throughout America. The film school generation was on its way. A lot of new film people Francis Coppola, John Sayles, Martin Scorsese, Dennis Hopper, Brian De Palma, Robert De Niro, Jack Nicholson, Jonathan Demme, and Peter Bogdanovich cut their teeth on B-movies produced here by Roger Corman. They made horror movies, prison pictures, and biker flicks with lots of nudity, politics, and style. The mother of all the biker flicks at the time was this one, Easy Rider. Writer, director, actor Dennis Hopper, who worked for Corman, made this road movie that defined its era. A rock soundtrack, wind in your hair, cool sunglasses, the open road, long lenses. He captured the carefreeness of the hippie days. Hopper hurled modern techniques at his film. He moved from one scene to the next by cutting to it, then back, then to it, then back again. No mainstream film had previously mucked around with the grammar of editing as much. Why was Easy Rider a box office sensation? Because young people were impatient with the old-style conformist filmmaking. Because the movie was about endings. Peter Fonda foresees that their journey won't last forever. They're killed by conservative duck hunters. Middle America gets its own back. Liberal moviegoers somehow saw Martin Luther King, Bobby Kennedy, and later Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin in the tragic ending. One final film of the 60s was so astonishing, so ambitious, that it seemed to try to top all the stylistic boldness of the age. 2001: A Space Odyssey was directed by this man, Stanley Kubrick. Kubrick started in stills photography, and as this footage shot on the set of The Shining shows, camera positioning was central to his art. He'd often film from below. Like Orson Welles and Buster Keaton, he was an inventive, confident realizer of physical worlds on screen. 2001 shows this supremely. Editing in film usually cuts out time. This famous cut from pre-human life to the time of space travel cuts out more time than any other edit in movie history. In this scene, Kubrick attached the camera to the set and moved both simultaneously in a grand rotation to give the sense that in space, no particular direction is upside down. This is what actually happened on the set. The actress walks upright on the spot and everything else turns around her. A spaceship is taking astronauts to investigate a mysterious black monolith. In doing so, they seem to travel through time and have mind-altering experiences. Kubrick has these pictured abstractly. The hallucinated effect of this sequence resembled the 20s films of Walter Ruttmann. There was nothing political about this scene, but if modernism was also about self-loss, ambiguity, the emptiness of lives, this sequence seemed to be its greatest movie moment. Overall, cinema in the 60s felt like space travel. Movies were everywhere, including Africa and Iran. Large number of directors accepted that film wasn't just a window through which you saw characters and stories. It was a language and way of thinking in itself, related to space, colour, shape, and this was the biggie, time. Would this be a permanent change? Would directors from now on always think in terms of time and abstraction as well as story and character? The answer, of course, was no. The 70s were coming. Old-fashioned entertainment, romantic cinema would soon be back.